Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. And today I am going to discuss a new movie. And the movie name is Final Destination 3. And this film made in 2006. So here is the movie full scene by scene detailed summary. So let's start the summary. Genre supernatural horror. Director James Wong. Main character Wendy Christensen. Death antagonists, the unseen force of death. Continuing the mythology from Final Destinations and Final Destination 2. And opening the amusement park and premonitions. High school senior Wendy and high school senior Wendy Christensen goes to Pennsylvania amusement park with her friends to celebrate graduation night. Her boyfriend Jason Wise and best friends Carrie Reyes are there along with classmates, and they board a massive roller coaster called the Devil's Flight. And as the ride begins climbing, Wendy suddenly experiences a terrifying premonitions, and the coaster's hydraulic systems malfunctions, bolts snap, and the track collapses. Cars derail at high speed, people are impaled, crushed, and decapitated and burned. Jason dies horrible in front of her. Wendy herself is thrown from the coasters and killed. The vision ends with her screaming. The disaster actually happens. Panicked Wendy forces herself off the ride and causing a scene. Several others leave with her, and Kevin Fisher, a classmate, Jason, and Carrie. A few others, secretary holds them back as the ride restarts, and then it happens exactly like her vision. The roller coaster derails, everyone still on it dies in a massive catastrophe, and Wendy realizes she saved some people, but that doesn't like being cheated. The pattern revealed itself, and at the memorial service, survivors begin noticing strange connections. Wendy reviews photos she took that night. In each photo and where are subtle clues foreshadowing and how each person will die, and Kevin becomes her ally. He tells her about the previous flight and 180 disaster and how survivors died in water. They realize death is coming back for them in the order they would have died on the roller coaster. And first death, Ashley and training batch. Two friends, Ashley skip school to go training inside and so where I was, inside separate training beds, drinks spills, shields collapse, heat increases, and the beds jam shut. The girls are slowly cooked alive as the beds overheat, and brutal and claustrophobic death scenes. Vanley checks her photos and the pattern has begun. Luis Romero, the gym accident. Luis walks out in the school gym and Wendy and Kevin try to warn him, but he refuses to believe them. And a sequence of tiny accidents unfolds. Weight shifts, screws loosens, and water spills. A cable snaps, and a massive weight plate smashes his head instantly. Death is precise and violent. Erin Ulmer, the handwear store. And Erin is working at a hardcore store. Again, Wendy and Kevin try to warn her. Events spiral. Nail guns misfire. Boats fall. And forklift trips. She narrowly escaped several near deaths. Okay, and then flagpole falls forward, multiple nails fire into her head, and that uses misdirections, building tensions before striking unexpectedly. And Perry Malinowski's The Fireworks. On July 4th, students gather for fireworks. Wendy believes she sees Len Magny next in her photos, but that escapes order due to previous chain reactions, fireworks launches, malfunctions, falling structure, crushes Perry instantly. The order is not always straightforward. That adapts, and Len and the control illusions. Len confronts Wendy and accusing her of causing panic, and he believes in random chaos, not fate. And in a scrapyard confrontations, industrial equipment shifts, Ignis rave, heavy object swings, It appears Len survives, perhaps breaking the change, and Wendy thinks it's over. But suddenly a falling sign slices Len in half. That was never finished. And final act, the subway visions. Months later, Wendy is on the subway with Kevin and her sister Julie, and she begins seeing signs again and advertisements resembling death. Survey sparks a man with a camera. She realizes she is having another premonitions. The survey train derails. Inner visions and everyone dies, and she tries to escape. But unlike the opening, the film cuts ambiguously, and we hear the crash and black screen. The ending implies they did not escape. Death always wins. Core themes and psychological meaning. That is inevitable, and you cannot cheat fate permanently. Illusion of control. Wendy believes understanding the pattern gives you power, but death adapts. Anxiety and hypervigilance. Wendy develops trauma symptoms, paranoia, obsessive photo analysis, and heightened fear response. She becomes consumed by trying to control the uncontrollable. And how Final Destination 3 differs from parts 1 and 2. More stylized deaths, stronger visual foreshadowing, photography motif, and more nihilistic ending. And Wendy is more emotionally fragile than previous protagonists. Death orders, chronological roller roasters, victims, Ashley and Aslier, tanning beds, Louis Jim. Erin hardware stores, Perry fireworks, and Len scrapyard, Wendy, Kevin, and Julie implied subway crash. Okay. And if you want next, I can give Wendy Christensen's full psychological profile, hidden symbols, and photo for a shadowing breakdown. Every death explained step by step with mechanics. Why this is considered the most rewatchable film in the franchise. Just tell me which direction you want to go. So now I'm just going to explain you So now I am going to explain you Wendy Christensen full psychological profile. From Final Destinations 3, Wendy Christensen is one of the most psychologically layered protagonists in the franchise. Unlike previous leads, she is not emotionally detached or instinctively strong, and she is sensitive and progressively destabilized by trauma. And let's break her down clinically and symbolically and quote personality before the digesters. Sensitive and introspective. Wendy is artistic, photography hobby and observant, and emotionally expressive. She notices details others ignore. And photography is important psychologically. So it represents freezing time, trying to control fleeting moments. Preserving safety through image, and she already shows mild anxiety, discomfort with risk, and she hesitates before the roller coaster and a need for reassurance from Jason. She is not thrill seeking. She goes on the ride mainly due to social pressure. Okay. Social pressure and the premonitions trauma triggers. When she the roller coaster digester, her nervous system experiences acute stress, shock, dissociations, and slow motion perception. Panic response, sensory overload, and it mirrors real life trauma exposure. After the disasters actually happen, she develops symptoms similar to acute stress disorder, later resembling PTSD symptoms, and hypervigilance, constantly scanning surroundings, intrusive thoughts, that's imagery, paranoia, survivor's guilt, and obsession with patterns. Unlike some previous survivors, Wendy is deeply affected emotionally. And just wait for a couple of seconds. So the premonitions trauma triggers when she sees the roller coaster digester, her nervous system experiences and acute stress shock, dissociation, slow motion perceptions, and panic response. Sensory overload, and this mirrors real life trauma exposure. After the disaster actually happens, he develops symptoms similar to acute stress disorder, and later resembling PTSD symptoms. Hypervigilance, constantly scanning surroundings, and intrusive thoughts, death imagery, paranoia, and survivor's guilt, obsession with patterns, and unlike some previous survivors, Wendy is deeply affected emotionally. And survivor's guilt, Jason, her boyfriend, dies on the coast, and psychologically this creates why him, not me, guilt, self-blame, and if I didn't panic, would things be different? Emotional fragility. Her grief is not processed properly because she is constantly anticipating the next death. She never gets time to mourn. Trauma replaces grief, and control versus chaos conflict. Okay. Wendy's main psychological battle is, if I understand the pattern, I can control it, and her use of photographs become obsessive. She studies shadows, zooms into small details, searches for hidden signs, and this reflects compulsive meaning, making a common trauma response. The brain after trauma tries to predict danger, prevent future shock, and regain controls, but that is these films constantly disrupts that illusions. Each time she thinks she is ahead, that adapts, and this creates a learned helplessness over time. Anxiety escalation. As deaths continued, his behavior shifts and increased irritability, emotional breakdowns, and desperation in warning others, social isolation. Friends start seeing her as unstable. She becomes psychologically alone, and this social rejection worsens trauma. Comparison to previous protagonists. Compared to Alex Browning, Part 1 and analytical calm and Kimberly Corman. Part 2 proactive brave. Wendy is more emotionally reactive, more visibly anxious, and less confident, more psychologically vulnerable, and that vulnerability makes her more realistic. Final survey scene, psychological collapses. Months later, when she boards the survey and we see trigger sensitivity posters resembles death imagery and sensory over stimulations and dissociation starting again. She begins experiencing another premonitions, and this shows her trauma never resolves and her nervous system is permanently altered. Whether she dies or not is left ambiguous, but psychologically she is trapped in anticipatory fear forever. Clinical breakdown, and if diagnosed realistically, Wendy might meet criteria for acute stress disorders evolving into PTSD, generalized anxiety traits, and survivor's guilt syndrome, hypovigilance trauma response. She does not show psychosis, she remains grounded in reality. Her fear is justified within the film's world and symbolic meaning. Wendy represents the illusion that awareness equals control, the attempts to freeze fate, and the fragility of youth facing moral mortality. And her arc says understanding that does not defeat it. Why she is one of the most human final girls. Wendy cries, Wendy panics, Wendy breaks down. She is not empowered by trauma, and she is damaged by it, and that makes her psychologically powerful. They are tragic, okay? And if you want next, I can break down hidden symbolism in each photo clip and what long-term psychological future Wendy would realistically have, how accurate her trauma portrayal is clinically a deep analysis of the survey ending, and tell me which directions you want to go. So now I'm going to explain you the state for hidden symbolism in the photo clues from Final Destinations 3. One of the most unique elements in this installment is the photography motif, and when this camera doesn't just capture memories, it captures fate in fragments, and the photos function on three levels: literal, foreshadowing of death; psychological projections of fear; and symbolical commentary of inevitability. Let's break them down one by one, and the roller coaster, cracks and instability. Before the digesters, Wendy's photos subtly show cracked tracks, distorted expressions, and warped mental shapes. Symbolism, the illusion of safety. The illusion of safety is already broken, and the smile is the photo's contrast with impending horror. Times appears stable in photography. Times appears stable in photography, and just wait for a couple of seconds. So just wait for a couple of seconds. So now we are too many deserts, knees broken from dancing, and memories for life. So here's little just wait for a couple of seconds. So I'm just checking. And before the digesters, the time appears stable in photographs, but really is unstable. Photography freezes the moment that destroys it, and Ashley and Ashlyn sun is equal to heat imagery. In their photo, sun flares appear exaggerated, and red and orange tones dominate. One girl has a palm tree shadow across her face resembling flames, Symbolism. The training bat's artificial sun becomes their crematorism. Piety obsessions that through vanity and artificial warmth becomes lethal heat. Louis Winstead's impact imaginary in his photo. Two vertical objects appear behind him like swords, and his expression is aggressive. Weight equipment shadows resemble blades, and his thighs via blunt force trauma, a weight plate crushing his head. Symbolism and masculine bravado. Physical strength cannot defeat fate, and the warrior falls instantly. The swords represents Fail's power. Fail's power and Erin sharp objects and wood splinters. Inner hardware store photo. Nails appear near her face. Wooden beams intersects her image. Angel's lines points towards her head, and she dies from multiple nails firing into her skulls, and symbolism industrial precisions and orderly environments becomes chaotic tools of construction becomes tools of destruction. Death hides inside ordinary objects. Very explosive and patriotic imagery, and in Paris photo, red, white, and blue dominate. Firework shapes appears near her. Celebration imaginary masked danger. And she dies during fireworks when a structure collapses. Symbolism, celebrations turning catastrophic, and Freedom Day, July 4th, ironically shows there is no freedom from fate, and public joy versus private mortality. And Lane Industrial Shadows, Lane's photo contains metal beams forming slashing lines and dividing shadows across his torso. He dies when a heavy falling object slices in half. and so slice in half. Symbolism, he believed in randomness is cut apart. Rational Daniels cannot seal against inevitability. The diving shadow represents his philosophical split from Wendy. And subway imagery, motion, and repetition. In the final act, advertisements resembles prayer that clues. Train imagery mirrors the roller coasters, circular designs repeating cycles. Symbolism, the roller coaster was only the beginning and the track continues. Life is a look, not a straight line. The subway is a metaphorical second coaster, a more mundane one. A deeper psychological symbolism. Photography represents control over time, memory preservation, and the illusions of performance. But the photos only reveal depth, not prevent it, and Wendy believes if I look closely enough, I can stop it. But the camera doesn't save anyone, and it only reveals inevitability, fate versus free will theme. The photos suggest, and the future is already written. Signs are always present, and humans just fail to see them. The movie visually argues fate is embedded in the present moments, and the clues are not random, they are integrated into everyday life. That is not dramatic, it's structural. Why this is the most visually thematic films in the franchise, unlike Final Destinations, Premonition focused on the Final Destinations to chain reaction focused, and part 3 makes fate visible in still images and in transform death from invisible force. Hidden designs are the ultimate message of the photos. Freezes the presents, but they cannot stop the future, and the more Wendy stares at them, but and so where the savants, the camera doesn't give her power, it depends her anxiety. If you want next, we can explore why Wendy's long-term psychological future would realistically look like. and clinical accuracy of trauma for trial and full breakdown of the subway ending slow was escape possible. How that design actually works structurally in this film. So now I'm going to explain you just wait for a couple of seconds and Wendy Christensen's long-term psychological future from Final Destinations 3. Let's imagine Wendy survives the subway crash, even tough. The ending is ambiguous, and what would her mental state realistically look like years later? And this is a clinical styles projections based on how trauma typically evolves. And immediate aftermath 0 to 6 months. If she survives another mass casual events, and she would likely develop full post-traumatic stress disorders (PTSD). Symptoms would intensify severe hypervigilance, constantly scanning environments, panic attacks in public spaces, avoidance of transportations, roller coasters, trains, elevators, and sleep disturbances, nightmares, replaying deaths, survivor's guilt, especially if Julie or Kevin die. His nervous system would be chronically on. She would struggle with crowds, loud noises, mechanism sounds, and metal scratching engines. Even camera flashes could become triggers. And chronic PTSD phase 1 to 5 years without treatment. Wendy could develop and complex trauma symptoms. And because her trauma is not one event, it's repeatedly anticipations of death and CY experience, and emotional numbness or difficulty forming relationships, and persistent anxiety disorder, depressive episodes, dissociation under stress, and she may also develop obsessive safety rituals, checking exits and mapping escape routes, researching structural failures, and monitoring news for accidents. This is trauma-driven controls behavior. Survivors' identity crisis, where his core belief becomes Everyone I get close to dies. And this can lead to avoidance of intimacy, fear of attachment, self-sabotaging relationships, isolations, and her worldview shifts from optimistic youth, fatalistic realism, and she may struggle with trust, stability, and long-term planning, because psychologically she doesn't believe in a long future and relationships with photography. This is critical. Photography symbolized control in the films, and long term she could go one of two ways, and path avoidance, and she quits photography completely. The camera becomes a trauma trigger, exposure mastery, and she continues photography but shifts focus, capturing decay, urban landscapes, morality themes, and art becomes processing. Many trauma survivors unconsciously channel fear into creative expressions, and philosophical shifts. Unlike survivors in earlier and trials like Alex Browning, who becomes paranoid, and Kimberly Corman, who fights back. And Wendy's personality suggests she will develop an existential anxiety, morality, obsessions, deep awareness of fragility, and she may study psychologically, study fate, determinism, and develop spiritual searching tendencies, and trauma often triggers existential questioning, and could she recover? Yes, but only with trauma focused therapy like EMDR and exposures therapy, social support, safe attachment rebuilding. Without support, she risks chronic anxiety disorders and major depressive disorder, social withdrawal. She is emotionally sensitive, which increases vulnerability but also increases capacity for emotional depth and empathy. And the best case future versions of Wendy, if she heals, she becomes deeply compassionate. She understands fragility of life. She values present moment intensely. She lives intentionally rather than fearfully. Her trauma becomes awareness, not paralysis. And roast case future versions. If untreated, severe PTSD, isolations, fear-driven life, and possible agoraphobia, persistent dread of sudden death. She would not be crazy and she would be exhausted. Final psychological truth. Wendy's tragedy is not just for the sees death, and it's that she sees it repeatedly and cannot stop it. The long-term damage is not fear of dying, it's fear of unpredictability, and unpredictability is life itself. And if you want, next weekend explores how clinically accurate her trauma portrayal actually is, and whether a subway ending suggests fate can ever be broken, and the structural rules of that designs in this film. So now we can how clinically accurate drama portrayal actually. So now I'm just going to explain you clinical accuracy of Bandy's trauma portrayal. Okay. Yeah. Let's evaluate Wendy Christensen's trauma responses using real psychological criteria. DSM-5 standards for PTSD and acute stress reactions. Short answers surprisingly realistic in emotional presentations, exaggerated only in supernatural mechanism, and immediate trauma response, acute stress after the roller coaster, digesters when the shows stock crying spells, trembling, disorientations, and hyperventilations, emotional instability, and these are textbooks acute stress reaction symptoms. Very realistic. Many disaster survivors display dissociations, delayed emotional processing, overwhelming guilt, and the film portrays this well in early scenes, memorial, hallway panic, shaking voice, and hypervigilance and pattern seeking. Wendy becomes extremely alert to small environmental details and objectively analyzing photographs, interpreting shadows and symbols. Clinically, trauma survivors often develop hypervigilance and constant scanning for danger, meaning making compulsions, and the brain tries to restore controls by identifying pattern, and it is neurologically accurate. After trauma, the amygdala becomes overactive while rational filtering weakens, and our behavior aligns with this. Survivor's guilt, Jason dies while she lives, and her emotional breakdown shows. And it should have been me distress at funerals and emotional overwhelm when others die, and survivors' guilt is extremely common after accidents and natural disasters. War. Her portrayal here is emotionally believable and escalation towards PTSD. She displays several PTSD criteria and interesting symptoms, flashbacks and premonitions, imaginary replying, disturbing thoughts, avoidance, fear of rights and mechanical sounds, negative moods, changes and irritability, hopelessness, emotional volatility and hyperarousal, starkly response, constant anxiety, and clinically she meets most PTSD symptom clusters, and where the film exaggerates the premonitions, obviously supernatural, speed for psychological shifts, and real PTSD often develops over weeks or months, not instantly. Constant, accurate intuitions. In reality, trauma survivors may misinterpret natural stimuli as a threat, and Wendy, however, is usually correct. Neurobiological realism, and her portrayal aligns with real trauma, brain changes, and after severe trauma, amygdala becomes hyperactive, prefrontal cortex regulation weakens, and cortisol levels stays elevated. sleep cycles disturbed, and her constant tensions and emotional instability match chronic stress psychology. Comparison with the final destination protagonists compared to Alex Brewing, a more analytical Kimberly Corman, more proactive, and Wendy feels more vulnerable, more emotionally reactive, more visibly traumatized, and which is psychologically more realistic for teenage survivors. And clinical verdict accuracy rating is 7.5 out of 10, and the emotional distress portrayal realistical, hypervigilance, realistic survivor's guilt, realistic and supernatural foresight, fictional speed of cognitive patterns mastery exaggerated, and the most realistic element her deteriorations, and she doesn't become stronger, she doesn't become heroic, she becomes exhausted. And that is how chronic trauma often looks. If you want next, we can go deeper into the exact PTSD subtype, and she most likely fits, and whether the survey ending suggests a permanent trauma loop, and the philosophical questions: is fate a trauma a metaphor? And so so where we was now I'm going to explain you. Does the survey ending mean a permanent trauma loop? From the final destinations, and the subway ending is one of the most psychologically disturbing conclusions in the franchise. Not because of lore, but because of what it implies, and let's break it down structurally and psychologically. What actually happens? Months after the scrapyard incident, Wendy is riding a subway with Kevin, her sister Julie, and she start noticing an advertisement that really resembles earlier deaths. Clues. That clues a mechanical scratching Similar to the roller coasters, a man taking photos sparks on the tracks and she becomes visibly injurious. Then she has another premonitions of the subway derailing and killing everyone. She panics and the screen cuts to black. We hear the crash structurally a repeating pattern, and notice the cemetery opening scene, ending scenes, and roller coaster climb. Subway moving forward and mechanical tension, premonitions, screaming, and catastrophe, implied catastrophe. This mirrors the beginning intentionally. The film suggests the pattern never stopped and the illusion of survival was temporary. Psychological loop interpretations, and from a trauma perspective, this ending can symbolize and re-experiencing trauma. Trauma survivors often feels like they are reliving the event and repeatedly when they escape one disasters and anticipates another, lives in constant expectation of impact, and the survey represents not just death but the nervous system stuck in repetition. The fate loop theory, some fans interrupt this as the literal time loop where death resets the sequence, but psychologically it reads more like a loop of inevitability. Life continues forward on tracks and you cannot step off easily, and the ride continues whether you are ready or not. Is escape ever possible? The film's message seems to say temporary escape, yes. Permanent escape, no. And even if Wendy survived the subway crash, she would still anticipate the next one, and that anticipation itself becomes the prison. Trauma interpretations, permanent hypervigilance, and in clinical terms, some trauma survivors never feel safe again, and their brain remains in and fight or flight mode, and constant anticipations of catastrophe, sensory scanning, and the survey ending reflects that mental state visually. The world becomes a roller coaster you cannot exit. That's a philosophy in this film. Unlike a Final Destination, which explores order, and the Final Destination, which explores a chain reactions and intervention. Part 3 explores the illusion of pattern mastery. Wendy thinks if I see it, I can stop it. But the survey proves seeing it doesn't prevent it. Awareness is equal to control. Why the cut to black is powerful, and we never see the crash, because the horror is not the impact, it's the inevitability. And the audience becomes Wendy and anticipate the crash, and we hear it, we imagine it, and the mind completes the trauma. Final interpretations, the ending suggests whether she dies or not physically, psychologically she is trapped in a loop. The loop is not time, the loop is fear, and fear has no final station. And if you want to go even deeper, we can explore is the franchise a metaphor for anxiety disorder, and what exact PTSD subtypes when most closely fits, and why part 3 is considered the most nihilistic entry. And is Final Destination 3 a metaphor for anxiety disorders? From Final Destination 3, this is one of the most psychologically interesting interpretations of the franchise, and short answer yes. That functions very much like a cinematic metaphor for chronic anxiety, and let's unpack that. That behaves like anxiety. Notice how that operates in the film, and it's invisible. It cannot be confronted directly, and it builds tension slowly. It turns ordinary objects into threats, and it creates chain reactions from minor details, and that is exactly how anxiety disorders work. An anxious brain scans the environmental challenges, amplifies small risks, imagines worst case outcomes, and feels danger everywhere. In the movie, everyday objects become lethal and training beds. Weight machines and nail guns, fireworks, subway trains. Nothing is inherently evil, but everything becomes dangerous that mirrors anxiety, cognitions, and hypervigilance as that vision. Wendy's ability to see patterns resembles trauma-driven and hyper-awareness. And people with PTSD or severe anxiety often overanalyze details. People with PTSD or severe anxiety often overanalyze details, predict a catastrophe, feel impending doom, and in most real life cases, those fears don't materialize, and in Wendy's world, they do. The film externalizes her anxiety into a literal force. Chain reaction is equal to catastrophic thinking, and anxiety works through catastrophic thinking. If these small things goes wrong, everything collapses. That's design is the movie functions exactly like this. And spilled drink, a loose screw, a jammed latch, and a small spark. Tiny triggers lead to fatal outcomes, and this mirrors how anxious thought patterns escalates, and small stimulus spiraling mental digesters, and the loop is equal to chronic anxiety cycles, and the subway ending. The subway ending reinforces these anxiety disorders. Often feels like you survive one crisis, you prepare for the next, and relief is temporary. The cycle repeats. Wendy never feels safe again, and that is not just killing people. It's maintaining a state of permanent anticipation. And why part 3 feels more psychological than parts 1 and 2, and compared to Final Destination, focus on fate, logic. Final Destinations 2 focus on casualty and interventions. Part 3 is emphasizes perceptions, the camera, the pattern, the clues hidden in plain sight, and it's about seeing danger everywhere. That's anxiety. Is death real or symbolic? Within the story, that is real, but thematically, death operates and as existential dread, fear of unpredictability, loss of control, and catastrophic anticipations. In other words, that is equal to the mind's inability to tolerate uncertainty. And the tragic irony of Wendy's attempts to control that by analyzing photos of parallels, anxiety suffers trying to control the future through overthinking, research, planning, and avoidance. By control never becomes absolute, and the more she searches for safety, and the more trapped she feels. Final psychological interpretations, the franchise turns morality anxiety into a literal where I was into a little antagonist. It asks, what if your worst case scenario always came true? And that's not just horror. That's living inside an anxiety disorder's material. If we want to go even deeper, we can explore what specific anxiety subtype Wendy most resembles. GAD versus PTSD versus panic disorder. We have only 20 minutes left. Why part 3 is considered the darkest philosophically, and whether the franchise ultimately argues free will is an illusion. So I'm going to explain here. Now I am going to explain you why Final Destination 3 is the darkest philosophically from Final Destination 3. Among the early trilogy, Part 3 is widely considered the most nihilistical entry, not because it has the most gore, but because of it says about control, fate, and survival. Let's break down why. It removes the illusions of winning. Final Destination, there is at least the sense of figuring out death's order. Final Destination's 2 characters attempts to intervene and temporarily reset fate, but Part 3, it gradually dismantles the idea that understanding the pattern gives power, and Wendy deciphers clues, sees studies photographs, he indeed identifies symbols, and it still doesn't matter. The movie's message becomes knowledge does not equal control. That's philosophically darker. That's philosophically darker. Awareness becomes a curse. In earlier films, premonitions is almost a gift. In part 3, awareness destroys Wendy philosophically, psychologically. She becomes hyper vigilant and emotionally unstable, socially isolated, exhausted, and seeing the pattern does not empower her. So you can see this is my favorite movie, and I hope also this is your favorites. You can see this in go and watch this into the theaters, and you can see this in your mobile phones, your PC, your laptop. And everyone loves this movie. So just wait for a couple of seconds. So it traps her. The film suggests the more conscious you are of morality, the harder it is to live freely. That's existential horror. And the endless loop ending. The subway finale removes closure entirely. There is no final defeat of death, no clever trick, no hopeful survival, no clear victory. The story ends exactly where it begins. On track in motions with impending catastrophe, the structure itself is circular. That circularity implies there is no escape from inevitability, and determinism over free will. Philosophically, part 3 leans heavily into determinism. Every object is already positions, every chain reaction is set, and every detail is embedded in reality. The photos doesn't create fate, they reveal what was already there, and the universe is this realm is mechanistic and pre-programmed, unchangeable. Free will become a confronting illusions, and that much darker than simple horror. That is impersonal. Unlike typical horror villains, no motive, no personality, no emotions, no dialogue. That is not angry, it is not evil, it's just function. That core could naturality is terrifying, and the film suggests the universe doesn't hate you. It simply doesn't care. And You and Morality, part 3 focuses on teenagers celebrating graduations, a symbol of beginning, freedoms, future potential. Then it systematically destroys them and the philosophical subtext. Life's milestones doesn't protect you from randomness, and optimism does not delay morality. Wendy as existential protagonists compared to Alex Browning, and who becomes investigate, Kimberly Corman, who attempts strategic survival, and Wendy becomes emotionally overwhelmed, philosophically destabilizes, and trapped in awareness. And she represents the modern existential subject, aware of fragility, unable to escape it, and forced to live with it. And the final philosophical message, if part 1 asks, can you just fate? Cheat fate. And part 2 asks, can you reset it? Part 3 answers no, and even trying will break you. And that's why it feels the darkest. It's not about dying, it's about knowing you will die and realizing that knowledge doesn't grant control. If you want to go even deeper, we can explore does the franchise argues free will is completely fake, and how this film connects to existentials, philosophy, karmas, determinism, and absurdism. Why audiences philosophically enjoy watching inevitability unfold. And which direction interests you most? Which direction interests you most? And let's see what happened. And La, 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 la. Final Destinations 3 is existential philosophy from Final Destinations 3. This film is not just a horror story about death, it mirrors deep existential philosophy about fate, absurdity, and human anxiety. Let's connect it to major existential thinkers. Determinism, the illusions of free will. Philosophical determinism argues and every event is caused by prior events in a chain of necessity. In the film, loose screws, falling drinks, and shifting beams, misfired fireworks, and every path is a chain reaction already set in motion, and Wendy thinks she's making choices, but every outcome still unfolds. This aligns with hard determinism. Free will feels real, but events are structurally inevitable. The photographs reinforces this idea. They don't create fate; they reveal it. Okay, they reveal it. And Albert Camus and the absurd. Albert Camus described the absurd as the conflict between our desire for meaning and the universe silence. That is exactly Wendy struggles, and she desperately tries to find pattern. Decode meaning, understand that's a design, but the universe gives her no moral answer. People don't die because they are bad. They are no lessons, no cosmic justice. Just mechanism and just absurdism. Existential anxiety. Heidegger's being towards death, and Martin Heidegger argued true awareness of mortality creates existential anxiety. Must people suppress awareness of death, and when they cannot, she lives in constant confrontations with morality. That awareness and paralyzes her, isolated her, and changes her perceptions of reality. Hedges would say she is forced into authentic awareness, and but it's psychologically overwhelming. And fatalism versus freedoms, and the fatalism says whatever will happen regardless of your actions. And the survey ending reinforces this idea even after warning and pattern recognition. Interventions, attempts, and the cycle restart, and the film implies and fate adapts to your resistance, which philosophically suggests freedom is not escape, only movement within constraints. The roller coaster as an existential metaphor. The roller coaster symbolizes life, and you board voluntarily. You climb upward. You scream. You cannot steer. You cannot stop mid-track, and the survey mirrors it later. Life runs on tracks. You feel emotions, but you don't control the rails. That's existential determinism is visual. From photography as human meaning making. Humans create art, religions, science, and philosophy to make sense of mortality, and Wendy uses photography to photograph the same way. She believes if I study, I can She believes if I study it, I can master it. Existential philosophy says understanding that does not remove its inevitability, it only intensifies awareness. And why this makes part 3 so dark? Unlike typical horror, there is no moral victory, no redemption arc, no heroic defeat of evil. The film quietly says you are aware, you are intelligent, you are careful, and it still doesn't matter. This is existential horror. And final philosophical insight, if you apply Camus philosophy, and true question is not can Wendy defeat that, it's how do you live knowing you can't, and that's the core existential dilemma, and the film leaves that questions unanswered. And if we want to go even deeper, we can explore whether that is this franchise represents cosmic indifference or structured fate, and why audience psychologically enjoy watching inevitable doom, and whether anxiety about death is necessary or meaningful living. Which one interests you most? Is that cosmic indifference or structured fate? In Final Destination 3, this is one of the deepest philosophical questions in the franchise. Is that just random, uncaring chaos, or is it an organized system correcting disruptions? And let's examine both interpretations. Cosmic indifference theory. This view suggests this universe is neutral and this is no intentions, no designs, no punishments, and accidents happens because physics unfolds and objects collide. Small triggers escalates and these lights with existential singers like Albert Camus, who argued that the universe does not provide moral meanings, and in this reading the roller coaster's crash is not destiny, it's mechanical failure and the survivor's letter. That's the specific invincibility. The pattern Wendy sees are psychological projections, and this interrupts turns death into not a being but an entropy. Structured fate theory. But part 3 complicates that the photography contains specific foreshadowing. The death order follows sequence logic. When someone escapes, the order exits. And final thought, if death were chaos, there would be randomness, and if death were evil, there would be motive. But in Final Destination 3, there is only design and design without empathy. That's existential horror at its purest. Okay? And here was for the today's video. I hope you are loving this, and if you are loved this, then like our video, subscribe our channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon, and let's meet in the next video. Thanks for watching. Goodbye everyone.